She was mistaken for a coffee girl in a billion-dollar boardroom. But just minutes later, she dropped a truth that silenced every powerful man in the room. Because what they didn't know was that she held the future of the entire company in her hands. This isn't just a story of corporate ambition. It's a story of resilience, legacy, and the unstoppable rise of a woman they never saw coming. If you're new to the channel, then please subscribe and like the video. It truly helps us grow. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's jump into the story. The lobby of Valentech Tower gleamed under the early morning light. Polished floors, glass walls, and quiet humming lights framed the grand entrance of one of the country's most powerful tech firms. Every employee who walked through the doors that morning wore sharp suits, carried sleek tablets, and moved with the confidence of people who belonged. But among them was someone different. Janessa Rain stepped through the revolving doors, unnoticed by most. Dressed in a simple navy blazer and carrying a slim folder, she walked with purpose. Her shoes clicked softly on the marble floor as she approached the security desk. She nodded politely and made her way to the elevator, the only sound around her being the ding of floors passing. She was not a stranger to rooms like this, but she knew how quickly assumptions could shape reality. Up on the 42nd floor, the executive boardroom was already filling. Suits and titles gathered around a long glass table, voices low, coffee steaming, screens lit with spreadsheets. And then the door opened. Janessa stepped in. She paused just inside the threshold, letting the atmosphere settle around her. Her presence, quiet but certain, barely caused a stir. A few heads turned. One man raised an eyebrow. Another leaned toward his colleague and whispered something with a chuckle. To them, she didn't look like a board member. She didn't even look like someone scheduled to speak. Dean Barkley, the senior vice president of operations, barely glanced up from his tablet. He tapped his empty coffee cup on the table and barked out, "Black coffee, no sugar." He pushed the cup in Janessa's direction, already looking away. A beat of silence fell over the room. Janessa stood still, gripping her folder. Her heart gave a quick jolt, but her expression didn't change. She looked at the cup, then at Barkley, and then back at the rest of the room. No one said a word. She reached for the cup and took it gently in her hands. "Yes, Mr. Barkley," she said, her voice even, polite. A few men smirked. Someone tried to hide a laugh behind his hand. Janessa turned and walked out of the room. Each step was measured, each breath steady. But inside, she felt the heat of that moment settling deep in her chest. She had been mistaken. Again. They thought she was a new assistant, maybe someone from the temp agency. To them, she was there to serve, not to speak, not to lead. But what no one in that boardroom knew, not Barkley, not the others, not even the CEO himself, was that Janessa Rain wasn't there to take orders. She was there to give them. 10 days earlier, she had received a letter. It arrived in a cream-colored envelope, hand-delivered by courier to her modest apartment in Silver Springs. The letter came from a law firm with a name she didn't recognize. She had opened it slowly, expecting legal jargon, maybe a clerical error. Instead, it told her a story she had never heard before. It revealed that her late father, Marcus Leclerc, had been one of the original co-founders of Valentech, a fact hidden from public record. Before his passing, he had arranged for his 45% share of the company to be transferred to his daughter, Janessa Rain. The terms were clear. Her identity would remain confidential until a scheduled board meeting, when the legal team would disclose the change in ownership. She had been invited to observe that meeting silently until the announcement was made. But as she stood in the hallway now, Coffee cup in hand, Janessa realized something important. The men in that room didn't need an announcement to change their minds. They needed a reminder that leadership comes in many forms, not always loud, not always expected, but powerful all the same. She entered the break room quietly and began brewing the coffee. The rich aroma filled the space. Her fingers moved with calm precision as she prepared the cup, placed it on a tray, and took a deep breath. The weight of the moment pressed against her shoulders. But she didn't shrink beneath it. She stood taller. Janessa Rain knew where she came from. She knew what it had taken to walk into that building, and she knew exactly where this story was going next. Because in less than 30 minutes, that boardroom would no longer be ruled by assumptions. It would belong to her. Long before she walked into the towering headquarters of Valen Tech, Janessa Rain walked the cracked sidewalks of a Baltimore neighborhood where dreams were easy to lose. Her story didn't start in boardrooms or universities. It started in a one-bedroom apartment above a noisy corner store where she shared a thin mattress with her mother and learned to fall asleep to the sound of sirens and street traffic. Her mother, Marlene Rain, was the strongest person she had ever known. A woman small in size, but unmatched in spirit. Every morning, Marlene woke before sunrise to make breakfast with whatever she had left in the fridge. A single egg, a half bag of rice, sometimes just toast and tea. Then she left for work. First shift was janitorial at the local community center. Second was cleaning offices downtown. And when the sun set, she wiped tables at a diner 3 blocks from home. She never complained. Not once. Janessa didn't understand it all at first. She only knew her mother came home exhausted, her hands rough, her shoes worn thin. But she smiled whenever Janessa asked for help with her homework. She always made time. As Janessa grew older, she began to see the truth behind her mother's tired eyes. There were unpaid bills, eviction notices, skipped meals. But Marlene never let poverty steal her dignity. She moved through every struggle with quiet grace. In school, Janessa was different. While other kids joked and played, she sat in the back with a second-hand economics textbook, pages creased from overuse. She spent hours at the public library, not for fun, but because the heat was on and the lights stayed on. 2 things she couldn't always count on at home. She listened to old recordings of financial lectures through donated headphones. She took notes in spiral notebooks she'd found in a school donation box. The other kids called her weird. Some laughed when she talked about starting a company one day. Others didn't even bother to listen. But Janessa listened. To her mother, to the world, and most importantly, to the small voice inside her that whispered, "Keep going." There was one night that changed everything. She was 13. The landlord had come by earlier and left a notice on their door. They were weeks behind on rent. Marlene had sat at the kitchen table with her head in her hands. Janessa saw something that scared her more than poverty. She saw defeat. That night, she wrote in her notebook, "Dear Mom, I promise I'll make things better. One day you won't have to work 3 jobs. One day you'll rest. I swear." Those words became her fuel. In high school, Janessa pushed herself harder. She joined the debate team, started a small tutoring business, and enrolled in every free business workshop she could find. She applied to dozens of scholarships and was rejected from most. But one said yes. It came in a thin envelope from Pembroke University, a top-tier institution known for business and tech. Full scholarship, 4 years. She cried when she read it. Her mother cried too. But at Pembroke, new challenges waited. Many of her classmates came from privilege. They wore expensive clothes, drove sleek cars, and spoke in a language of certainty. Janessa walked the campus with second-hand books, packed lunches, and the pressure of generations on her shoulders. And then came the stares. They weren't always harsh. Sometimes they were just curious, but often they came with assumptions. Some students assumed she was there because of a diversity program. Others acted surprised when she spoke up in class. A professor once mistook her for a student aide. Janessa didn't argue. She worked. Late nights in the library, early mornings at the tutoring center, weekends spent building business models and preparing case studies. Slowly, her name started to mean something. Professors called on her first. Classmates asked her to lead group projects. She won competitions, earned honors. But still, she never forgot home. Every Sunday she called her mother. Marlene's voice, tired but proud, reminded her why she kept pushing. Every scholarship renewal letter, every academic award, every late-night cup of coffee was another brick laid on the path towards something greater. After graduation, Janessa entered the real world. She interned at 2 financial firms and worked as an analyst in a tech startup. The office floors were glossy, the meetings full of buzzwords, but the undertone remained the same. Few looked at her and saw leadership, but she didn't flinch, because Janessa Rain knew something they didn't. She had learned leadership in the waiting rooms of food banks, in the silence of library stacks, in the strength of a mother who gave everything so her daughter could have a chance. Now, as she stood in the break room of Valen Tech with a cup of coffee in hand, she remembered it all. She remembered the hunger, the fear, the notebooks, the promises, and most of all, she remembered who she was. Not just a girl from Baltimore, not just a graduate or an analyst, but a woman who had weathered the storm and still stood. And as she stared out the break room window, she knew this wasn't the end of the story. This was the beginning. Janessa Rain walked back to the boardroom with the coffee tray in her hands. The warm cup sat perfectly still, but her heart was pounding beneath her calm expression. She had been insulted, underestimated, and dismissed. Yet she knew that everything was about to change. Each step she took echoed against the polished floors of Valen Tech's 42nd floor. She was not returning as a silent guest. She was coming back as someone who held more power than anyone in that room could imagine. The boardroom door stood ahead, tall and heavy. She paused before opening it, breathing in slowly. In just a few minutes, she would reveal the truth. And when she did, nothing inside that room would be the same again. She entered. Most of the executives were still focused on their screens and conversations. The air was filled with the quiet hum of business talk, mixed with the occasional clink of coffee cups. Janessa approached Dean Barclay and placed his cup gently in front of him. "Took long enough," he muttered, without looking up. She said nothing. Instead, she stepped back and took a position near the window, where she could see the whole table. Her hands were steady, her eyes calm. She waited. Minutes later, the CEO, Martin Calder, entered the room. Tall and serious, Calder greeted the team and took his place at the head of the table. "Before we begin," he said, "we have a special announcement from our legal department." The room quieted. A man in a dark gray suit stood. His voice was smooth and confident. "Good morning. As some of you are aware, the late Marcus Leclerc, co-founder of Valen Tech, passed away earlier this year. What was not publicly known is that he named a beneficiary for his 45% share in the company." Gasps and murmurs rippled across the table. "We are here today to announce that the full share of his estate now belongs to his daughter, Janessa Rain." Silence. Every head in the room turned. Eyes widened. Jaws dropped. Dean Barclay sat frozen, the cup of coffee still in his hand. Janessa stepped forward. I am that daughter, she said, her voice clear and firm. And starting today as the company's largest shareholder, I intend to take an active role in shaping its future. For a few moments, no one moved. Barkley blinked, stunned. This has to be a joke, he said, his voice tight. You're just... I'm not your assistant, she replied, and I never was. The legal representative continued. All documents are in order. Her stake is now active. She has full voting rights and decision-making authority. Janessa looked around the room. I've spent the last few days observing your operations. I've reviewed proposals. I've listened to your plans. And frankly, what I've heard doesn't match the direction this company needs. CEO Calder raised an eyebrow. Go on. Janessa walked to the front of the room. She reached into her folder and pulled out a carefully prepared presentation. Connecting her laptop to the projector, she brought up slides filled with charts, data, and new ideas. Valentech is losing ground, she said. Our competition is moving faster. They're investing in clean tech, artificial intelligence, and global expansion. Meanwhile, we're stuck recycling the same strategies that worked 10 years ago. Her voice didn't shake. I've prepared a new strategy, one that focuses on smart innovation, ethical leadership, and opening new markets. We need to evolve or we will be left behind. The room, once skeptical, now leaned in. Slide after slide, Janessa laid out her vision. From international partnerships to employee well-being programs, her plan was bold, but backed by research. Her voice never rose, but her message hit hard. Dean Barkley interrupted. This is nonsense. She's never run a company. She's young, inexperienced. Janessa turned to face him. You assumed my worth based on what I looked like, not on what I knew, not on what I've built. But I've worked for this moment my entire life. And now that I'm here, I won't be quiet just to protect old systems that no longer work. CEO Calder looked around the table. I'd like to hear the board's feedback. One by one, members spoke up, cautiously at first, then with growing respect. Her proposal is detailed. These ideas are fresh and much needed. It's ambitious, but impressive. Barkley's face flushed, but he said nothing more. Janessa ended the presentation with a simple message. Change isn't comfortable, but neither is failure. I'm not asking for blind support. I'm offering a real path forward, one that respects where we came from, but more importantly, one that knows where we need to go. For a moment, there was silence again. Then Calder nodded. We'll hold a vote on the CEO nomination next week, he said. But I think we all know this company has just turned a corner. As the meeting ended and the boardroom slowly emptied, Janessa remained by the window. She didn't smile. Not yet. She knew this was only the beginning. Outside, the city stretched into the distance. Glass buildings reflecting the morning sun. Opportunity and challenge, side by side. She had reclaimed the room, but the real work was still ahead. Janessa Rain stood before the board of directors, no longer the quiet observer they once overlooked. The upcoming vote for the new CEO of Valentech had drawn more attention than any in the company's recent history. The press waited outside. The staff watched closely. And inside the glass-walled boardroom, tension was heavy. The meeting began early that morning. The sky outside was still pale with dawn. Inside, the board members sat in a tight row, their faces unreadable. At the head of the table, CEO Martin Calder opened the session. We're here to vote on the next phase of Valentech's leadership, he said. As most of you know, Janessa Rain, now the company's majority shareholder, has presented her vision for the company's future. Today, we vote to determine whether she will assume the role of Chief Executive Officer. Silence followed his words. Dean Barkley rose to speak. His tone was sharp, his eyes cold. "I want to remind the board that experience matters," he said. "Miss Rain may own shares, but leadership of a billion-dollar company requires more than confidence and a few strong opinions. We must vote responsibly, not emotionally." His words landed with force, but the room did not move. Then Janessa stood. "You're right," she said. "Leadership does require more than confidence. It requires clarity, strength, and the willingness to listen. It requires the courage to serve, even when others doubt you." She did not raise her voice. She didn't have to. "I've faced doubt my entire life," she continued. "I've been questioned, ignored, and told I don't belong. But each time, I've proven that leadership is not about where you come from. It's about where you're going and who you bring with you." Her words settled like calm before a storm. The vote began. One by one, board members cast their choice. Some spoke clearly, others nodded silently. The early votes leaned in Janessa's favor. Even those once unsure were now considering the weight of her vision. Her presence had shifted something. Then it was Barclay's turn. He stood tall, but his voice held a hint of strain. "I vote no," he said firmly. "I believe she is not ready." It was expected, but it no longer mattered. The final vote came from CEO Martin Calder himself. "I vote yes," he said. "Miss Rain has shown more leadership in a few weeks than some show in decades." The decision was final, 8-1. Janessa Rain was named the new CEO of Valentech. The boardroom erupted in applause. Cameras outside flashed as the announcement was made official. But Janessa didn't celebrate with noise. She sat quietly for a moment, breathing in the weight of what had just happened. When she finally rose to speak, the room fell into silence. "Thank you," she said simply. "This moment is not mine alone. It belongs to every person who's ever been overlooked. Every young girl told to stay quiet. Every working parent who sacrificed everything. Today, we begin a new chapter." As the applause returned, Janessa walked out of the boardroom, not with pride, but with purpose. In the weeks that followed, she made bold decisions. Dean Barclay was dismissed from his leadership role, not as revenge, but as a necessary change. She replaced outdated policies with new strategies focused on inclusion, innovation, and integrity. She created space on the board for fresh voices, people from diverse backgrounds with real experience and shared values. She launched programs to support mental health, flexible schedules, and fair wages. She created an internship pipeline for students from underserved communities. And she made sure every team member, from engineers to janitors, had a seat at the table when big decisions were made. Outside the company, the media took notice. Articles called her a rising star. Headlines praised her reforms. But Janessa paid more attention to the letters she received, hundreds of them from young people around the country. They wrote about how her story gave them hope, how they saw themselves in her journey, how they believed, maybe for the first time, that they could lead too. Janessa began visiting schools and speaking at conferences. Her voice reached beyond the boardroom, into communities that had been ignored for too long. She reminded people that leadership wasn't loud. It didn't always wear a suit. Sometimes, leadership looked like showing up, doing the work, and refusing to give up. Still, resistance never fully disappeared. Former executives tried to challenge her direction. Some claimed she was too young. Others accused her of changing too much, too fast. But Janessa didn't argue. She let her results speak. Profits grew. Employee retention rose. Partnerships strengthened. Bit by bit, even her critics began to see the truth. One late afternoon, as the office began to quiet, Janessa sat by her window with a warm cup of coffee. She looked down at the same city that once ignored her. There was a knock at her door. It was Barkley. He entered slowly, no longer the man who had barked orders. He looked older, softer. "I've had time to think," he said, "and I want to say, I was wrong." Janessa nodded. "Thank you for saying that." They spoke quietly for a few minutes. When he left, there were no hard feelings, just lessons learned. As the sun set, Janessa looked at the empty coffee cup on her desk. Once, that cup had been a symbol of disrespect. Now, it reminded her of something else. How storms don't always come with thunder. Sometimes, they arrive quietly and change everything.